How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a good day, evening, whatever time it is at the time you are watching this. Currently, for me, it is late on Sunday night, and yeah, if you are watching this, you probably know or have heard of the blunder that Magnus Carlsen made that sort of sent shockwaves around the world. The blunder, the table banging, whatever you want to say. So it went pretty viral, so I imagine that most people know what happened. And I have a short out, which you should check out. That's actually did pretty successful, so definitely feel free to check that out. But I did want to make a more in-depth video about the game. Not necessarily just over-analyzing every single variation, things like that. This isn't going to be some, like, hour deep dive on the nuances of this Italian, but just kind of going over maybe how we got to that point and where the threads kind of started to turn and things like that. So, as was, what's the word I'm looking for? Usual? Sorry, I'm already blanking out. As was usual, typical, I guess, in the in Norway Chess, we had a Rui Lopez. It was actually not Italian. I misremembered that. It was a Rui Lopez. Like normal, I'm not really going to delve too much into the opening. Although if y'all are ever interested in these like opening deep dives, I'm always happy to do them. D4 kind of like breaks away at the center, knight F1. Both sides are maneuvering their knights to F3 and G3 and F6 and G6 respectively. So both sides have ideas to maybe bring the knights into F5, F4, and then maybe H5 to support it and things like that. So that type of stuff is there. Gukesh plays D5 to sort of like lock this bishop in. Magnus plays A5, and really what you start to notice, and you can't really necessarily pinpoint like where it maybe went south for Gukesh, but this is a typical Magnus game. He's just slightly better. He has a more comfortable position. Potentially, he has this knight, this nice bishop eyeing, and seems like when I look at it, kind of what I notice in this position, just based on my, lowly 1800 eyes, is that there's kind of a sort of dichotomy between these bishops. This A4 bishop is just like kind of, I guess it's preventing rook E8, which is good, but it's kind of staring into the space. Whereas Magnus's bishop actually has potential to cause some damage. So, like already the computer, I think here, was saying that Magnus should go bishop takes H3, pawn takes, knight takes, king G2, knight F4, king G1, and knight G4. And just really like this position for black. Say rook C3 says knight H3, king G2, and then knight F4. So, I mean, it's not going to repeat. It says rook B4. I guess you go after... Well, the pawn's protected. I don't know. I mean, it just really likes this, which I guess makes sense. Like, you've kind of shredded the king. You have the two knights. Maybe at the right time, the queen could get in and things like that. So I think, obviously, bishop takes H3, if anything, is more of a computer move. So rook B4 was played, and Gukesh played queen C2, king H1, and then here... Again, he's already starting to lose the thread, but I think he's really losing it after queen A2, in which Magnus plays this move, bishop D3. And bishop D3 simply has the idea of collecting the E4 pawn. You have 1, 2, 3 attackers on the pawn, and only 2 protectors. And you're going to have to go very passive to defend it. Like, I guess Gukesh could try rook E1, but that would... Computer wants queen b6, and now this pawn is under fire. So clearly, Gukesh's position has a lot of problems. So Gukesh tried knight d2, Magnus played h5, Gukesh took the pawn on a5, and Magnus played h4. So he's attempting to remove the defender of this e4 pawn. And yeah, it might seem like Gukesh just won a pawn on a5, so what's the big deal? Well, this pawn is going to be way more important than that a pawn. It's going to enable black to sort of like when everything's simplified, he's going to be able to sort of like have a passed pawn to use, maybe push like f5 and things like that. And on top of that, this b3 pawn is also weak, which he could sort of pile up on. So Gukesh played rook a4, so not immediately reacting to this threat. He goes rook a4, which attacks the rook, and if rook takes, pawn takes, and then takes the knight. So the problem with taking the knight, well, not the problem necessarily, is that, well, kind of the pattern. I'll actually demonstrate it in another move. after rook a2. If Magnus takes, which I think in this variation is fine, but if Magnus were to take, Gukesh can just take back, and he's attacking the knight on f4, which is protecting the bishop on d3. So the knight would move, and then the bishop would get taken. So it's not like, oh, he's just hanging the knight. What's he doing? Well, there is kind of a tactical justification to it. So, main variation is rook b8, rook a2, king g7, rook a7, rook d4. So eventually Magnus does cash in, takes the knight, and then Magnus just takes on h3. Sorry, that was Gukesh I meant. Whatever. So knight takes h3. And then eventually they just kind of simplified to an endgame where if you take stock, Magnus is up a pawn. He has 4 pawns. Gukesh has 3. And he has a nice knight on f4. Very active rook. So Magnus is doing very, very well. And this should just be a vintage Magnus game, right? Where he just grinds out the opponent and wins. Well, not so fast. Rook c2. And you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? You're just moving away from the attack that the knight was sort of creating. Well, it's starting to get a little bit weird because you're threatening to go rook c7 and take the f7 pawn, and there's not a lot you could do about it, which prompts Magnus to play king f6, and maybe he thinks, well, okay, I'm fine. I'm just going to go king f6. h4 is on the docket. And h4 in a lot of these situations is going to take away the g5 square. I know the knight's already taking away the g5 square, but like if the knight ever were to go anywhere else, then the king can't quite get in. So eventually Magnus, also I am actually wondering something. So what if Magnus just went here? Not Magnus, Gukesh. I guess the move is rook f8. Interesting. So I guess here, whatever. I'm kind of doing this on the fly. Just, you can forgive me. It's pretty late and I need to get a video out. Knight g5, king d5. So there is kind of some drama because the king is in the middle of the board with the rooks sort of, swarming the king. Rook a5, king d4, rook a4, king d3, rook f2. There might be some ideas like rook f3 or like rook a2 connecting the rooks and things like that. And here, now it is a difficult situation, so again, I'm not trying to criticize the players or anything like that. But maybe there's a tent in the armor after f6, although the most accurate variation for Gukesh to play is very, very, hard to find. It is rook f3, which is the move he plays. That's the first move. Rook f3, king e2, and Gukesh has to play the move rook e4 check. Keep in mind, this knight is hanging, so that's just kind of important in a second. Rook e4 check, king d2, rook a4. So you check the king, you force it to the d2 square, and then you go back with the rook on a4. And the idea, what if the knight just gets taken? Boom, boom, boom. And this is a draw because you have the 2 rooks operating on the second rank. So that is what Gukesh would have needed to find. But, these are not going to be the most accurate variations. Knight e4 check, king g3, d5, knight takes f6. So Gukesh kind of gets one of his pawns back, but Magnus keeps his center connected past pawns. So he still has his winning chances. Rook f8. Gukesh plays rook f2 check. Carlsen plays king f1. King e1. Knight d7. And this is the move that kind of sent shockwaves across the chess world. This move, knight e2 check. So the idea is that after rook takes, king takes, knight takes, which is obviously what happened in the game, and we'll see sort of how that transpired, Magnus, in whatever way, was banking on these 2 pawns really just doing well for him. I don't know if he was banking on I guess he was banking on a draw. He probably had kind of resigned to the fact that he was probably drawing. Even though the computer says it's winning for black or better, it really would have been hard to convert. So he might have just been fine with going to a draw and going to an Armageddon game. But the problem here after d4, say, is that quite simply, Gukesh has an extra knight. And if he can maneuver the knight to a spot where you're stopping the d-pawn from being able to push, then you're very likely to win. Now, Eval Bar, of course, goes crazy and says, oh, it's completely winning for white. Well, it's very, very, very tricky. And Gukesh has to play extremely accurately in time pressure. Keep in mind, he has 37 seconds left. So let's sort of see how this is executed. Knight e6, because obviously, and I think this goes without saying, but it's also pretty instructive. If you have a situation where you have like a knight versus like a pawn or pass pawns, I mean, step one is just to get the knight closer. Like, you need to like just get like closer, like within range of the pawns, right? So you can't just afford to like dilly-dally with, I don't know, knight takes g6, and I'm gonna take this guy. Because eventually, yeah, this would just be losing, because after d2, there's no way for the knight to cover the d1 square, right? So Gukesh plays knight e6, d3, knight c5, d2, sorry, not d2, king e3. He's trying to make it tricky, basically by, I think he's saying way the e4 square is the idea, because if he got on d2, then Gukesh has this move knight e4, and then the idea being that you allow him to queen, but you have knight c3 check, and then you win back the queen. But after king e3, Gukesh found the only move, which has the same idea. Sorry, that's not the exact same idea, but the move is knight a4. Give them exclamation point. The idea behind knight a4 is just to go knight b2 and cover the d1 square. That is sort of the underlying motive. So after knight a4, Magnus tried e4. So if you go d2, maybe you try to do something like this. Well, you just go knight b2 here, and then you just have time to like push your pawn. If you queen, well, sorry, let's say you take, and then queen, Gukesh can take, and then you can even just go like king f3, just get this pawn, and you win the game. So after knight a4, Magnus tries e4, Gukesh realizes he has time to just play h5, and king d2, knight b2, e3, and then here Gukesh found the final sequence of moves, which is knight c4 check, because you're attacking the king and you have to hold on to the pawn. Then after king e2, king f4, and Magnus resigned the game. Why did he resign? Well, quite simply, Gukesh is going to take the pawn and then cover the square. So even if Magnus were to go all the way, then you can just trade and you have two pawns in the end, and that is winning for you. And so, yeah, very, very interesting game. I mean, it seemed like it was going to be a vintage Magnus game for a while, where he was just slightly better and just kind of pushing his advantage. But then things got a little bit tricky as it pertained to sort of like Gukesh being able to activate his pieces. And obviously it got so tricky that Magnus blundered and ended up losing. So just one of those games was very fascinating. It's kind of playing it back. Well, yeah. Very fascinating stuff. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, there will be some more content throughout Norway Chess. Oh yeah, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the standings and maybe next pairings. So, let's see, I think here. Yeah, there we go. So, I lose track. Round 7, I think, is tomorrow. Round 7 is going to be Gukesh versus Arjun, Magnus versus Hikaru, and Fabiano versus Wei Yi. So, gonna have some pretty fun, maybe like matchup-wise, this isn't necessarily the most anticipated round. I mean, you never turn down a good Magnus versus Hikaru game though, but Hikaru is not really having it this tournament. Magnus, obviously, well, he's tied for the lead, but he did just lose, so it is kind of critical for Magnus to get out of this with some points. So yeah, you have Magnus and Fabiano tied for first, Gukesh at third, Hikaru at fourth, Hikaru and Arjun tied for fourth, and Wei Yi at sixth. Which, again, it's a very, very strong field. So even being last in this field doesn't necessarily mean you're some weak player or anything like that. Like you're some imposter. So anyway, again, I hope you enjoyed the video. And stay tuned for the next ones. And peace.